Hello, welcome to video 3. So this video is going to be similar to the last video, except I'm going to walk you through the actual PCB editor. So you will recall that last time we were talking about, all right, well, if I just want to make a PCB, why do I even need to bother making a schematic? And the reason is that the whole point of Altium is that it's constantly checking what you're doing. So you're setting up rules, you're making promises to Altium, and then when you go to actually generate a circuit board, Altium is going to make sure that you are staying true to your word. You're connecting the correct components together, which you specified in your schematic, and you're within a bunch of constraints. So ahead of time, I've gone through and I've placed a bunch of parts down. This is a completely nonsensical schematic. This has no meaning and no function. And I did it in just a couple seconds. So the nice thing is that all of these parts actually came with footprints. So we didn't really talk too much about footprints in the last video. So really quick, what a footprint is so, okay, here's my schematic symbol, which everybody has seen before. But what does it mean in real life, right, when I go to make a PCB? And the answer is it's this little box down here. This is the physical space. So these are real world measurements that were used to generate this. And when you hand this to a manufacturer, they're going to actually mill what's given here. So this is the real world representation, and all of my parts have this, which is essential because I can't connect the parts that I promised I would connect if they don't exist. So the next thing I did was I did a right click on my project, add new to project, and I did a PCB. It's right here. I didn't give it any interesting name, but you probably should. And that's it. This is what opened. Okay. So you'll also notice that we're going to talk in later videos about what it means to annotate a schematic and validate it. We're not going to get into that right now, but those are things I've done ahead of time. So basically, Altium is prepared to start placing parts. But I can't place parts yet. There's a couple things I need to do first. So you definitely are going to notice first this big black region here with a little grid on it, and then you're going to notice this little pointer thing. So this is your world origin. So at the bottom left of my screen, right here, you'll see X, Y, grid, okay? And what that is it's where the tip of my cursor is at all times. And this is how I'm going to do all my measurements. So if I go to this little crosshair here, you'll see that it's going to read almost 0, 0, just like that. And then I move away from that. So let's move that to a more reasonable position. So if I hit edit at the top and I go to origin, I go to set, I can put that right here at the corner of my PCB. And I might choose to put it in the middle or somewhere else, but for right now, that's just what I'll do. By the way, all the other navigation in the PCB editor is the same as the schematic editor, right? It's right click to pan, mouse wheel to go up and down, hold shift to go left and right, and then control to zoom in and out, just so you know. So let's say I want a board that is maybe 3 inches square. So that's fine. Here's what I can do. So I'm going to press G on my keyboard, and I'm going to get my grid options. So the first I'm going to do is change to the highest number of mils. So you'll recall that a mil is not a millimeter. Obviously, mm is millimeter. A mil is 1,000th of an inch. So 100 mil is 1/10 of an inch. So that's perfect. So as I move this around, you'll see that my bottom left here, these X and Y, they only change for quantities of 100 mil. So if I go to 3,000 mil, that's 3 inches. Perfect. So 3,000 by 3,000 mil is the other corner of my PCB. All right, so let's actually define the shape of the PCB. So the first thing I'm going to do is press 1 on my keyboard, and that's going to bring me into the PCB like layout mode. So then I can go to design and redefine the board shape right here. Cool, so now I have these crosshairs, and if I bring them to my origin and left click, I'm going to start drawing. And you're going to notice that my drawing stays as like a closed thing. That's because you can't have, obviously the board shape needs to be some closed polygon. So as I pull this out, we can watch the X in this bottom left corner. We can watch it increase until we get to 3,000, and then we will click. Once we click, that lets Altium know that there's the first corner of the polygon. Now I'll change it till it's 3,000, 3,000, click again, come over here, click again. Oops, click again. And there we go. Now I'm going to right click and my shape has been redefined. So perfect. And that's what I want. So now if I hit 2, I'm going to go back to 2D mode, and that's good. By the way, 3 is your 3D mode, but let's not worry about that too much right now. You should just know that 1, 2, and 3 are how you change your views. So we're going to do most of our work in 2. There is another way to define a board shape that I think is worth mentioning. So if we go into down here, you can see all of our layers that are all empty right now. But if I go to Mechanical 1 and I come up to my active toolbar, I can see there's a list of drawing options. So that's great. I can do some interesting things with these. So I'll do something a little crazy. We'll draw. You have a circle. So I think I'm using the arc tool right now, right? And I can define an arc. I can change the properties of it. You can see on the right-hand side the properties window is opening, so I can like give it a proper radius and a bunch of other important things. And then I'll just close this. So I need to press G again to make my resolution smaller. And that little circle means that I'm actually connected. I need that before I can click, otherwise my board shape is not going to be a closed polygon. And right there, cool. And I need to click twice and then right click. Okay, perfect. So if I select all of these, I've got a new option, and I can go to Design, Board Shape, and I can define from selected objects. So if you need a more complicated board shape, this might be the way that you want to do it. So I'll just put that out there and offer that to anybody who needs to make a very specific board shape to fit maybe in a special enclosure or for whatever reason. So I'm going to go back to my other one, though, for this tutorial. Now that you know that's there. And I'm going to go back to top layer. So if you remember from our first video, top layer is going to be the traces on top of the circuit board. Bottom layer is the same for the bottom. These are the electrical connections. So this is where you're going to spend most of your time. And the mechanical layer is going to be, non-electrical information, right? Like the board cutout. We'll talk more about these as we use them. But for now, let's, I think, stick to top and bottom layer. And I'm finally going to go to design, and I'm going to import changes right here. So here is everything in my schematic. I'm going to not select rooms for now. I really just want to add these components and show you what happens when you move them around. First thing I'm going to do is validate changes, make sure I've got green check marks. If I've got red X's, then that's a problem. I need to go back and fix in my schematic. And it looks like everything's good. So I'll execute and close. And there we go. Here's our 3 parts. Not too exciting, but it's a start. So I'm going to drag and select all of these, and I can drag them onto my PCB. And so now I'm really putting my parts onto the board and moving them around. And what I choose and go with here when I actually export this project is what is going to be sent back to me from the fabricator. So the first thing I want to do is hit G again and change to something a little more granular here. So when you're first placing your components, you want to spend a lot of time kind of at these higher numbers, higher mil numbers, because you want things to be mostly nicely aligned and simple. Don't make it too hard on yourself. As I move these around, so if I click on one of these things, it becomes the active component. If I click and hold, it becomes a floating component. And once it's floating, I can do some other things. So for example, I can press the space bar to rotate it, which you will definitely want to do, and I'll explain why in a second. I can also press the L key, and that's going to put it on the bottom of the PCB. So that's important if you don't have enough space on the front, or if you need to use both sides, press L. Yeah. So what are these little lines that are moving around and they're all over the place? So those are the electrical connections that we promised in the schematic editor. So when we go to route these traces, we need to make sure that this pad right here is connected to this pad right here. And hopefully you'll have given your nets better names, and we'll talk about what that means later. So that these letters or numbers here are more meaningful. So let's see what I can do with this. So if I come up, actually, I'll tell you to press Control W. That's the hotkey for wiring and routing. It's pretty handy. So Control W, and I click, and I can start connecting things. So perfect. And Altium is smart, and since it knows what my schematic looks like, it's not going to let me connect these to the wrong things. You can see that my trace actually stops before it touches. And the distance between the trace and the thing that I'm avoiding right now is something we can specify under our clearance settings. And we'll show you how to do that in a later tutorial. But the important thing to realize is that the only thing I can do with this trace is either terminate it or connect it to the point that I promised. You'll also notice that I have another, I'm going to cancel this. I have another pad right here that's connected to the same pin. So that means that I'm allowed to connect this here as well, right? Because it's all part of the same thing. We're going to talk about like what makes good routing. There are some best practices that you want to follow. This is all to come. Right now, I just want people to kind of see how this whole editor looks, So I will quickly just connect these things. Cool. And then I'll right click to cancel. And there we go. So if I click on these traces, I can get information about them. I can find out, first of all, what net they're part of. Again, we're going to talk about nets a lot more. But basically, that's just like the name of the wire. So I could name it ground. I could name it, data 1, whatever it needs to be. So that's good information. I can find out what layer it's part of. I can find out its width, and we can set global width constraints so that we make sure that, certain wires are always certain thicknesses. These are very important information. And yeah, so there's more information on this right now that I think you should know about. Obviously, there's this yellow stuff. So the yellow stuff is the top overlay. And what that means is that it's the actual ink that's going to be printed onto the PCB. So when we actually order this PCB, the manufacturer will print Q1 on top, and that lets us label our parts and know what everything is and kind of know what the footprint's going to be. And then you're probably noticing these stripy lines. This is a keep out. And what that means is that I can't place anything inside of these stripy lines or really do much inside of there aside from make my connections. Because obviously, once we assemble this board, there's going to be a part there. So it wouldn't make sense if I grabbed the resistor and tried to put it inside of here. And you see if I try to, I get these green dots, and these green dots are errors. Okay. Cool. So I think those are kind of the big things. Can anybody, Jimmy or Remy, think of anything important that I might want to add to this discussion?
Maybe vias?
Vias, oh yeah, that's a great one. So yeah, let's do that. Let's do an example with vias. By the way, to do this example, I'm going to come up to this little funnel, and I'm going to set it as a filter, and I'm going to just select tracks right now. So I can delete all my tracks. And then I'll turn everything back on. So that way I didn't select anything I didn't want to delete. Now I will kind of grab this resistor so it's floating. I'll press L and put it on the other side of the board. And so what would I do in this circumstance? Well, in this scenario, I have through-hole components. So this isn't a big problem, right? Because the through-hole components go through both sides of the board. But maybe I have, 2 resistors that I need to connect, and they're on different sides of the board. So how would I go about that? So what I'd do is I would use vias. So here I'll copy and paste it so I have an example of that. Actually, I don't know if Altium will let me route between them because they're not defined in the schematic, but it's okay. I will still make my point. So Control W, I'm in routing mode. And now if I click on this pad, you can see my trace is blue, which means I'm on the bottom layer right now. Like I said, that's okay because these are through-hole parts. But if I, for some reason, needed to get to the other layer, I could press the asterisk on my number pad, and I would get this little hole, right? That's our via that we talked about. And now I've jumped to the other side. So that is an important thing to keep in mind. We're going to use those a lot, and we're going to talk about when to use them and when not to use them, and where to use them and where not to use them. But yes, it's the asterisk to get those. If you don't have a number pad, you can still place them. Do you remember what it is? I think it's Shift.
It's Control Shift scroll wheel.
Control, Shift, and scroll wheel.
Yeah. So while you're placing a trace, if you hold down like Control Shift, then start scrolling with your scroll wheel, it'll bounce you between layers. So in this case, you just have a top and a bottom, but say you had like 4 or 5 layers, you basically start scrolling through layers of where
Yep.
you're placing.
And it's just one click of the scroll wheel, and I'm already there. So perfect. Cool. Yeah, that's a great thing to include. Let's just talk really quick, because this is gonna get its whole own video. But there's a bunch of information. So if I go to design and I go to rules, this is what's deciding what's an error and what's not an error. And it's really intimidating. So don't be, scared by it. Most of the default settings are going to be pretty good for most of the things you want to do. But yeah, this is what's deciding what's an error and what's not an error. So for example, if I go to, my clearance rules, I can see the minimum clearances that have been set up, how close can tracks get to pads, and other things and to each other before it's a problem. Because, manufacturers can't make anything you send them. You're going to have to look on the website and see they're going to tell you, oh, we can't make, traces that are smaller than 5 mil. So that's a problem that you're going to have to consider when you're designing things. You put the minimum into the rules, and then when you actually go to start routing things and creating a board, Altium will make sure that you don't do something that the manufacturer can't provide, provided you set those up correctly. Oh, and one last thing I want to mention before I go is just the Q key on the keyboard will switch you to millimeters. So that's handy if you're working with something like this. You can see maybe if I grab this resistor, I can see right here its position, in millimeters. There's other information here. If I hit Q, you can see so it changes from mil to millimeter. So from imperial to metric. Just handy thing to know. And we're going to actually start walking through the process of really making a proper PCB, not this silly thing that I just designed for this video, and everything that entails pretty soon.
Thank you for watching, guys. I know we keep kind of pulling you along saying we're getting to the PCBs, we're getting to the PCBs. But again, I just want to reinforce it's a steep learning curve. And I think this groundwork you're going to be thankful for this groundwork once you get going. It'll be a lot helpful just to have basic knowledge, like a ground level of knowledge for any one-on-one meetings you might have with us in the future, or stuff along that lines. So I hope you're enjoying the video still. Keep watching.
All right, thank you.